What up, our little honeydews, and welcome back to Sippin N B, where the drinks are icy and the book talk is more depressing this episode than spicy, but no, that's neither here or there. We're in part 10 of episode 9. We're your main bitches. Sorry, we're not excited about this episode. I'm Sam.
I'm Steph, and that is correct. We are. I mean, we're excited because we're making moves in the book, but we're not excited because if you listen to the last episode, we alluded to this moment, and now the moment is here, and we are not ready for it. So, yay!
Steph's just happy that she's not covering the incident.
No, but I am covering something just as annoying. Well,
it's true. None of these chapters
yours
are
is depressing, mine is annoying. It's fine. But like we always do, we're going to start with the note to the reader. This book contains themes and or discussions that some readers may find difficult to read. While there are no graphic scenes, there is mention of sexual assault, suicide, the death of children, and discussions of verbal, psychological, and physical abuse. If you need to talk with somebody about your experiences, there are people waiting to help. And there are resources in the description of this episode.
And that reader to the note is very imperative for today's episode because grief and the loss of loved ones and a lot of triggering topics will be brought up, especially starting here in chapter 40. So like we said in the last episode, if things begin to feel uncomfortable or you start to feel those triggers pressing into you and starting to kind of come up, feel free to skip ahead at any point. We totally get it. Take care of yourself. We'll be here when the sad stuff is gone too.
Correct. Our download, our metrics, listens, whatever, is not worth your mental health. So please do prioritize yourself. As we have said time and time again to Sarah, we are now saying it to you. Prioritize yourself.
Yes. You matter, and what you went through matters.
Correct.
So starting strong on chapter 40. We just left with Ash leaving her in the library to go talk to Addie's, who had the worst timing of showing up in history. Sarah is still in the library. She has not left, but she is not alone. The most supportive duo is here, and that is Eos and Belle. Okay, the most supportive Eos is here.
I was going to say, supportive duo, something like that.
And in this interaction, Sarah matches Belle's energy, and poor Eos is probably going to want to rip both their heads off. Eos and Belle come in, and they're like, "What are you doing here?" She says she was looking for something to read. Belle calls her boring, which I find insulting. So insulting.
She kind of is boring though right now.
It's true. So. Belle wants action. We can't fault her for who she is. Anyways, Eos is wondering if she's feeling unwell, and Belle's like, "I'm glad you asked. I was wondering the same, but I figured I'd get yelled at for saying you look like you haven't slept in a week." And Sarah is instantly assuming that they knew about the night before when she went all kitty cat and ran away.
Meow.
And is now kind of worried about what they think. She said, "I shifted in my note late last night and ended up running around and trailed off because she noticed they were gaping at her." She's like, "Oh, so you didn't hear about that?" And they're like, "No, we thought it was because of the attack that maybe you haven't slept." And Sarah's like, "I'm dumb. I should have thought of that." And they start talking about the Noda and how she's a cave cat. And she asks Belle what hers is, and she says an owl like Hanan. And she's like, "What the fuck am I supposed to do with that?" And Eos is trying to support her and say, "Be beautiful, wise huntress." And Sarah says, "Owls are creepy."
Yeah, well.
And Eos is like, "No, they're not. They're wonderful." And she's like, "I don't know about that. How they turn their heads is weird." And Belle looked at her like she wanted to do more than give her the middle finger. And Eos is not appreciative. And then they're talking about where Eos and Belle are going. They're heading off to Serta because Belle wanted to show her it. And they have a little bit of a tense moment. And then we find out Belle's weird fear because she asks, "Why are you going outside to Shadow Step?" And Belle says, I don't like shadow stepping between courts when I'm inside a building. I feel like I'm going to accidentally step through or into a wall and get stuck in it.
So that's us.
Yeah. I mean, to me, that's a very fair. It gives me Twitch's vibes when they're learning. Twitch's too, I think, actually, when they're learning to use their powers and she gets stuck in the wall. Like it
I
makes
did
me.
the little chant in my head.
I appreciate you. Sarah tells her that that is the weirdest thing. And Belle says, I say this with the deepest respect possible. Fuck you, Mia Liesa.
I mean, we love you, Belle. Don't you
And that's
worry.
when Ao said, okay, let's go. But then Eos asks Belle for a moment alone with Sarah. And she's like, wait, a moment where I can't be involved? And she's like, yep, and basically kisses her and sends her out the door. And I don't understand. Belle's the most supportive. Like, why would she not want her in there? I don't get it. I love Belle so much. But Eos wants to talk to Sarah, and they're talking about her shifting and how she hasn't heard of anyone shifting as soon as she did. Belle had just done it recently, only once, and even hers was sooner than anticipated. With Belle, she shifted because she was upset. We were talking about everything that happened when Kin attacked. It was the first time Belle actually brought it up and talked about how she felt when she heard that I had died. She's not big on opening up, like someone else I know. And so she's saying, I guess we have more in common than I thought we did. And she's saying, I knew that Nyktos would find a way to save you. I wasn't awake when Nyktos left the Shadowlands to bring you back, but I heard how he couldn't be talked out of it. Not even Nyktos could convince him to wait until the Shadowlands forces could join him. None of that surprised me, though. His reaction, his need to get to you as soon as he could, that is. I've seen the way he looks at you from the moment he brought you here. And even when he was angry, I saw how he looked at you the night of your coronation, and I knew that look of want goes bone deep meant. He looked at you the same manner I used to catch Belle watching me during one of our off periods. It was how I knew I looked at her. His love for you was so clear, etched into every inch of his flesh. And I love that. I love her. I love that Eos is giving her the reassurance I feel like she's needed for a long time.
Well, my thing is I don't feel like, well, I guess she could use reassurance because we all could use reassurance, but I don't think maybe in Sarah's heart of hearts she ever doubts Nyktos' love for her. But I think what he said last chapter, was it last chapter, the chapter before, whatever, last episode, in terms of like nothing, the way he feels doesn't change. I think that was the reassurance. I think at the end of the day, like she says it, she's like, I trust him, you know, I can lose control with him, XYZ thing. But I think at this point it needs to be a look inwards thing and not necessarily like, this is great that Eos is saying this, but I also am just like, I think it's one of those processing trauma situations in which she has to look inward versus instead of looking at how other people view her, she needs to focus on how she's clearly viewing herself.
Right, and she does bring that up in either it's in this chapter or the next chapter, how she always trusted Nyktos. It was herself she didn't trust. And I think the reassurance that Eos gives her, yeah, she reassures her that she always knew how Nyktos felt. And that's always good to be like reassured of that, like, oh, it's always good to know he's felt that way. But I think what's coming up right now is the reassurance that she needs more than anything of Eos talking about her difficulties having been where Sarah was, and it's okay to like process it and talk about it.
Exactly.
And pull yourself out of it. And they go in and talk about Eos and Belle's relationship, about how they were in the right mindset when they kind of took a step away from each other. And Sarah asks, what happened that you spent the last 2 decades apart when it sounds to me like you're both still in love with each other? And she says, it's hard to say. Belle can be strong. And she says, Belle can be so strong that's hard to not feel weak in comparison. And she says, "You're not weak." And she's like, "I know that. But to answer your question, it wasn't just that. I don't think either of our heads was in the right place. And you probably think it was Belle who wasn't in the right headspace. It wasn't, it was me. It took a long time for me to move past what happened when Colas held me, and even longer for me to realize that I hadn't yet when I believed I had. Like I was able to move on in certain areas, but not others. And like you, like probably everyone who has ever gone through something like that, I didn't like talking about it, especially with someone I loved. I didn't want her to," and Sarah said, "see you differently." And she says, "Yes. I knew she wouldn't, and you know Niktos won't, but I also know it's hard to stop thinking those kind of thoughts." And Sarah says, "It was, and maybe there's still a part of me that fears that, but it's me. I'm the problem. It's me. Why? I don't want to look at myself differently. That's the problem because I can't even deal with what happened." And Eos asks her what happened in Deos, and she says he hadn't been with anyone since Satoria. And she says that doesn't surprise her because when they were captured, he never did anything with his favorites. And they're talking about like how he liked to watch and the things he made them do. And she said that he didn't make her use any of that because one, she used one as a weapon, so they were all taken away. And she says that I think he believed I was Satoria. He wouldn't disrespect me. At least that's what he probably thought in that fucking messed up head of his. It's really messed up. And she goes on to explain how he did touch her, and how he would use compulsion on her to make her behave. And but she said he didn't go too far. And Ao says he went too far the first moment he laid a finger on you. She's like, "I know." And I never know if I should say this sentence or not.
You didn't non-consensually do things to her.
Exactly. It's just that one word I'm like, I don't want to say that word. And she says, "That's not a lie." And she says, "I believe you," and I'm relieved about that. And they kind of just sat there for a while. Eos, when she sat next to her, she didn't sit like right next to her. She gave her like a foot of space. She's giving her time to think. And she said, "At some point in that time and space, I told her everything. It was almost like I wasn't there. My lips and tongue moved without conscious effort." And after she's done telling her everything that happened to her, she says, "I thought I would feel better after saying something. I don't feel better. Fuck, I feel worse." Because it makes her feel like she's back there again. And she's saying, "I feel like I'm overreacting because I didn't have it like things didn't go as far with me and him as they did with others and you." And she said about the overreacting, she said, "Sarah, you're so wrong about that. Oh gosh. Yes, some of us experienced worse when he tired of us and tossed us aside, but that does not matter. What you went through is less. That does not mean what you went through is less than. He held you against your will, put you on display, and threatened you repeatedly. He manipulated you and abused you. He forced you to do things you didn't want to do. He assaulted you, and if you hadn't freed yourself when you did, he would have taken what he wanted. I know he would have. That is not nothing." And she says, "I know it's not nothing. I do." And she goes on to talk about how it's the lack of control that she had, and that's what she keeps getting hung up on. And Eos reminds her that they have control now. And then she talks about how that's what made her shift into her notice. She felt like she was back there. And she talks about having a hard time letting Niktos feed from her. And yet sometimes it feels like he's not as cold. And then she has this feeling in the back of her mind, and an image of rain forms in her mind. And she kind of has a light bulb moment of, I know what's been going on. And she tells Eos, "I need to go. I need to talk to someone. Oh, I need to talk to Rain." She says, "Thank you for talking to me. I know it didn't make me feel any better now, but I think it will." And Eos says, "It will. I promise." And so they separate paths, and she goes to look for Rain, and I think Rain might internally like have an aneurysm or cringe anytime Sarah finds him and says, "I need to talk to you." Like, I really do.
Yeah, maybe
uh,
just, stomach drop, like on those drop rides,
like, oh no.
Yeah.
Here she comes. But she tells him she needs to talk and that he needs to be completely honest with her. And he kind of like gets tense, like prepared, like, what's going on? And she's like, I think you already know. And he's like, it's impossible to know what you want to talk about at any given time, basically. And she says, not this time. And I'm asking you to be honest, not because I'm your queen, but because I'm Nyctos's wife. And it's like, whoa, she's dropping the wife card. And then she explains how she hasn't fed him since they've returned, but at times it feels like he's not as cold. And she asks, have you been feeding him? And it says the truth was instantaneous. It was in the slight twitch of his right eye. That's him having an aneurysm. And she says, I know, I'm not reading you, but no, I know. And he says, it hasn't been often. And she says, once is too many, and I'm sorry that you had to do that. And Raina's saying you can't be angry with him. And she says, oh my gods, I'm not angry with him or with you. I'm angry with myself. And then she's saying how it's been stupid. She should have been getting over it. She's his wife. She should have been doing this. And Rain is trying to tell her it's not your fault. And he's saying, listen to me, whatever hangs you up, it's not your fault. And she starts to speak again, and he says, shut up and listen to me.
Good job, Rain. Pat yourself on the back.
And
Standing
I
up to
said,
your
you
queen.
tell her. Like, oh, I love it. I love, shut up and listen to me. And she like snaps her mouth shut and it's kind of like, oh. And he's like, and I mean that with all due respect. Do you know how Colas made Nyctos feed until he killed? And do you know that afterward, Nyctos would refuse to feed for months? He almost made it half a year before he got so sick, so weak, that he was maybe one breath away from stasis. It got so bad, especially after Vesa started paying him visits, that we feared he would slip into stasis and we wouldn't be able to wake him, or that he would be driven mad by bloodlust. And she didn't realize it had ever gotten that bad. And he says that I'm sure you remember how close he came to the ladder the night the gods attacked you in the throne room. He only started feeding normally again after you came into his life, and he had a hard time even then, which I'm sure you also know. But if he has to feed from anyone else, like while you were in stasis, he struggled to make himself do it. His hang-up when it came to feeding was due to what Colas did to him, forced him to do. Do you think that's his fault? And she said, God's no. And he says, then why the fuck do you think it's your fault? Oh, I love him so much. And she says, you're right. And he's like, you don't need to sound disappointed in saying that. She's like, I'm not. It's just when it's my fault, I can fix it. I have control over it. At least that's what I tell myself. And he goes on to tell her that they've never seen Nyctos the way he is around Sarah. That he's never been one that likes to be touched, even as a child. But it's different when she's around. And it has been different since she's been around. It says, seeing him openly affection with anyone, I didn't think I'd ever see that, and I know I wasn't the only one. He loved you before he realized he could, and him coming to me to feed him, something he struggles with even now, is something he does because of his love for you. That is how he is changing what was done to him. It wasn't his fault, but he's fixing it. And even though this isn't your fault, you can still fix it. Fate, Sarah, you even know how. And she's like, I did. Oh, man. I know it's coming and I don't want to finish this conversation. I was like, why did my highlights stop? And then I remembered why, because I was too mad to highlight. And she's saying, I know it was past time that I did because we were supposed to be a team, partners. We stood by each other's side. We would change the realms. It wasn't that I didn't trust. Oh, this is the part I was talking about. She says, it wasn't that I didn't trust Ash. I trusted him with everything, my joy and sorrow, my pleasure and pain. Like I said to Eos, it was never about him seeing me differently. It was always about me thinking of myself differently. That was the problem I needed to face with Ash, and it couldn't wait. And she could tell Addis wasn't there, and so she was like, thank you for providing for my husband and telling me to shut up. And he said, you're welcome, I think. And she's saying she's going to go find her husband, and she doesn't get to finish what she's saying because a horrifying scream pierced the air, cutting through the atmosphere like a blade. And she realizes that Rain didn't hear it, and she's trying to figure out why no one else is hearing it. And then there's hundreds, thousands of screams brimming with pure terror and desperation. Guys, ignore my tone. I'm mad about what's coming. They were all in her. She realized they're all in her head. The screams were loud, blending together. It's a symphony of brutal terror. It's a great time. She starts like grabbing her hair and like hitting her head, trying to get the screams to go out. Rain is trying to help her. She says, in the intensity of the screams seemed to amplify, the sheer volume of suffering they conveyed became nearly unbearable. As hundreds, thousands wailed, pleading between gasps, punctuated by sobs as they fell. I felt them, I saw them. The desperation, the lifeless bodies, the pain. And then Nectus appears and Rahar is there, and Rain is like, Where's Nyktos? We need him. And he said he's been summoned to the pillars, and they're saying the souls can wait, and they say, you don't understand. He was pulled to the pillars, and everyone gets pale, and Rain's like, no. And they said, too many souls have arrived at the pillars to be judged by them. And Sarah says, souls, hundreds, thousands of souls, so many I could hear. I can still hear them. I can feel their death. And they're like, what could have caused this? And she's like, I gotta go. And they're like, no. And she's like, no, I got to. And she leaves, following the cries of the dying. She shadow stepped into the mortal realm, into a waking nightmare that had once been my home, Lysania. And chapter 41 starts with the most beautiful sentence ever. Death was everywhere. I hate it here.
I hate it here, and then as we progress through these next chapters, it gets, oh my god, you could see my tear on the side of my eye. It's like compounding hurt, but we'll get into that.
One second, I'm giving myself a moment to get into this chapter, because I am not. I cried so much reading this book, and this is one of the spots, and I'm just not ready.
We don't have to go into too graphic detail. We could just...
No, we're going to. Anyways. No matter where she starts shadow stepping all over the kingdom, and she says, no matter where I looked, no matter where I shadow stepped, death had come in the moonlight during the quietest, softest hours and reigned with supremacy over Lysania's capital. Neither wealth, power, nor age protected them, and even though I couldn't believe what I was saying, I knew. Gods, I knew whose screams I'd heard first. And so she's honestly just in this beginning part going around and seeing like all the death and destruction. And she makes it to the castle, and she goes inside and she sees Lady Kala, who's her mother's lady in wait, who was always with her mother. And then she sees long blonde strands danced in the wind, tangling with Lady Kala's brown hair, my chest compressed, a citrine hairpin glittering in the sunlight, a pretty, once buttery yellow gown now glistening with the streaks of red, but I heard her voice as if her lips moved. I would like that very much. And she realized there would be no future meetings, no desperately needed conversations, no attempts to try to understand each other, to forgive, no moving forward, allowing time to tell new stories. So Mom's dead. And she starts crying. And she says, a teardrop fell from my cheek and splattered on my hand. Red. It was red. Another fell, then another. The blood was no longer coming from me, but from above. She says, my throat constricted, my steps faltered, because she continues on through the castle. As I fell to my knees once more, my vision went black and then came back as I stared up at the jaw that was no longer stubborn. An awareness pressed upon me, but more pieces of me broke away when I saw none of the compassion and cleverness in her beautiful, once warm brown eyes. I shook when I saw the pin-stripped waistcoat, now black and red instead of black and white. Beside my sister was her wife, her head turned slightly to Ezra, as if Marisol had turned to see her love in the very last moment of her life. They died side by side, together, and I hadn't been here the first time for Marisol. I hadn't been here for any of them. Everyone at Wayfair was dead. All of them. I'm fine. Anyways, and then she sees the Cimmerian warriors. Cimmerian? Whatever. The ass face warriors. They're in the city like a plague of nightmare, and they once served Hanan, but defected once Bella ascended, and she says, I knew exactly where they had gone. And she thinks of Callum being there and how he'd wanted to visit with her mother one last time, saying he'd known. She's saying, I told them all they had to do was call my name. Why didn't Ezra do that? And then she hears from behind her a voice saying, Colas has come to a decision regarding the deal you've offered him. You now have his answer. And who is it but fuckface, bitch-ass fucker Kin? One day I'll have a nickname good enough for him, but right now I don't. I hate him. She says, our eyes locked across the field of dented armor, bent shields, and steel-sheathed swords. He'd finally gotten what he wanted, even though this wasn't the Shadowlands. Vengeance had been unleashed, and it would continue. He apologizes for not waiting until the irony ended, but he has grown rather impatient. What did you think would happen? That he would accept your deal? That he would somehow win? You cannot win against death. He is inevitable. Life is not. He laughed when he said life is not. I hope you liked my little voice for reading. And she says that laugh ended me, and she was now made of the anger and sorrow of her sister's tortured expression and her mother's forever silenced voice. It was nothing but the fury and wasted hope of those bodies left in the gutters like trash, and the souls lost at the sea. I was nothing but a vessel of rage and the anguish of the great unforgivable loss of those who'd perished. I arose not as the true primal of life, but as a primal of devastating ruin and wrath. I really need to read that book.
We really do.
And so she's going all primally, and Kin and Empress. So Empress is there. I don't know when he showed up. Honestly, I was so focused on hating Kin. But Empress is with Kin, and it says the land stopped trembling, the wind ceased, blood rain no longer fell, the very air itself contracted. I saw a flash of unease, loosening the corners of Kin's mouth, erasing the fucking smirk, and Empress's eyes widening. All the violent, devastating energy came roaring back to its creator, me. And they realize, oh shit, she's mad. And they throw these daggers at her, and she just kind of absorbs the pain, and she lets it become a part of her. She's past feeling and like everything like that. She's in full angy, bad bitch mode. Like, the fucker's messed up. What can we say? She threw them again. One grazed Kin's arm. She threw the daggers back at them. Empress got stuck in the chest, and she said, too bad, I've been aiming for the head. The Cimmerians come and try to guard them as they step back, and she calls them cowards, because they are. And she basically takes them out. I don't know, they thought that they were actually gonna defeat her in this moment. But yeah, she kills all of them, and Kin ends up getting away. He blows her a kiss and says later, and is able to shadow step out of there. But she turns to Empress, and she's able to get a hold of him. She said, I rushed forward, grabbing Empress's arm just as Lysania fell away. Violent power tore through the empty air with a scream, collapsing the mist swirling around Empress's legs. They end up in a cornfield. They're in the kingdom of Terra. And Empress is trying to get away and shadow step back to Lotho. They ended up in a cornfield in the kingdom of Terra, and Empress is trying to get away and to shadow step back to Lotho, and she ends up grabbing him and pulling him back to where they are, and he's yelling, you can't do this, you can't, and she says, you will die in this realm. And she starts to think of like Ezra's face, and her heart is cracking, and the ether is rushing to her, and she said, all around me the realm screamed, and I thought I heard my name in the loudest of them. And she ended up killing Empress. She drank deeply, taking in his blood, the very essence of the realms. I didn't care that I had never really spoken to this primal. I drank until I felt him weakening, felt his breaths becoming labored, and his heart falter. Only then did I tear my fangs free. Silvery ether lit Empress's veins, but it quickly turned golden. Blood leaked from the primal's eyes, ears, nostrils, and mouth, and seeped from his pores. The visuals, man. She says, "You will not pass into Arcadia. There will be no long rest for you, no peace. You deserve nothing. You will cease to exist. I am the one who is born of blood and ash, the light in the fire, and the brightest moon, the true primal of life, and the queen of gods and common man. I will give you what you deserve. I condemn you to the final death." And so he go bye-bye. Bye-bye, Empress. But the end of the primal of wisdom and loyalty wasn't instantaneous, and it's very gruesome, and I'm not going to read that part, because we've had a lot of gross stuff, and he just disintegrates, basically. But she says, Empress was gone, and it did nothing to assuage my rage or sorrow, it only grew. And then something begins to happen, because she killed a primal, and that's bad enough, but there's not a primal at the moment to take over for him. So the ether kind of builds up and spreads out. It says, in the distance, half the Macedonia rise came down. I could hear windows shattering as a scorching wind blew through Terra. For a brief second, I saw pink trees similar to those lining the Golden Bridge, as well as the moonlight-kissed thatched roofs of farmsteads and villages. I saw people running in the hazy glow across the field, so everyone's trying to escape because disaster is coming with this ether. The people, the orange-lit hills, the lower mountains of the Undying Hills that stretched all the way to the city of Macedonia crumbled into the sea, sending out a thunderous shockwave. A great wave rose, one as high as any mountain and as wide as the entire coast of the mortal realm. It blocked out the stars and the moon. A flash of intense silver cut through the night sky, and the arrival of another primal thudded in my chest. In the shadow of the still rising deadly tsunami, I saw Thanos' silhouette. He thrust his essence-lit trident into the wave, and with a shout calling forth a roar of powerful wind from all directions, ether erupted from the trident, exploding into a silvery web that pushed the wave down. So, yay, Thanos, I guess, for coming in and helping with that. Let me tell you, the first time I read this, I was so confused what was going on.
I'm still confused what's going on.
I think it's because, I don't know, just so much is happening in this moment. Like, I read it and I was like, is this Pompeii? What's going on here? I was so confused, but I think I was also like trying to read it through tears the first time. But yeah, so Thanos is there. He helped with the tsunami. It says the ground trembled and where the village had fallen, shells of packed hard ash now encased them. Hundreds of them were forever this is the part that really confused me. I was like, what happened? Some sprawled on the ground in clusters, families, others were alone on their knees, their arms shielding their heads, or raised as if they spent their last seconds praying to gods who would not answer, because we had brought this ruin upon them. Fine fissures appeared where embers had knelt and spread all the way into Macedonia. Small saplings wiggled free of the cracks all around me, growing, expanding, and rapidly becoming thick trunks with glossy, bleeding bark. Hundreds of trees, thousands, limbs sprouted like bony fingers, misshapen and bent, buds sprouted from branches and unfurled. Maybe this is how the Blood Forest got started.
I think we learn. Well,
I know it's where Malik gets entombed, but did he cause all of it, or was this the beginning of it?
Well, in the next chapter, it's referenced as the Blood Forest.
There we go.
So, there we go.
There we go.
We did it.
Good job, team. Look, I was so confused the first time reading this, I didn't think of this stuff.
My thing was like, is this like a cleansing? Well, by the end of the chapter, but it's like, is it a cleansing of like this area and just to start anew, or is this just the beginning of the end? And well, we already anyway.
So, guys, we can be just as confused as all of you. Yeah. So the rise of Macedonia, forest, dark crimson leaves and glistening bark, rose forebodingly in the stark moonlight. The once beautiful fields of Terra were no more, and their place was a forest birthed from soil drenched from primal essence and mortal blood, a tomb. The temperatures began to drop until she could see her breath and did nothing to cool her fury. She's raging. She says it was like a tempest of darkness roaring through my veins, consuming everything in its path, urging me to crush, obliterate. It was in every heartbeat like an echo of breath with my name as I opened to tear in the realm. Colas. And well, take it from here, Steph.
My first line of chapter 42 of the notes, Sarah Angie.
I got the depression, you get the rage.
I get the anger aftermath, yes.
Yep.
Alright, so chapter 42 starts with Sarah walking along the sun-streaked golden road, the scent of blood and death clinging to her. And there's a guard. There's a guard, and ether swells in her, and she's kind of just like, fuck bitches, I'm over it. I think this is very much remember when she, wow, this seems like so many books ago, but like in her origin, she was like her mother's assassin kind of vibe. Like I very much feel like this is the mentality.
Back to what she knows.
Her roots, correct. She's going back to her roots. Sarah Angie, and she's looking for Colas because she about to fuck a bitch up, sort of. And she's like yelling, she's like, Colas, you wanted this, face me, and he didn't appear. And she ends up running, into well, she pulled the essence to the surface. It pulsed and then crawled over the wall. I tore the innermost wall of the sanctuary down, block by fucking block, exposing what Colas kept inside to the sun. There were many of them, hundreds of ascended. Most started to run, their skins smoking. Some came at me, others headed for parts of the sanctuary that still stood. None made it, their flesh catching fire. My gaze collided with the fine features of one not much older than me, and it's Jove. He'd been a chosen, but he hadn't chosen this. He hadn't chosen any of this. The throbbing in her chest intensified, and Jove fell in a fiery heap. Through the smoke and crumbling stone, she saw a section of the sanctuary still standing, with strips of white rippling in the wind. She walked through the smoke, jerking to a stop. Then she sees a group of chosen huddled, and she's like, "It's okay." And she's finally kind of, I don't want to say coming to, because she's still pissed, but she's just like, what am I doing? She reeled back, inhaling sharply, and she shook her head in disbelief. Of course Colas wouldn't have taken them. He'd known I would come. All the guards were proof of that. Yet he'd still left them there. He didn't care about life, and she's now having a do I care about life kind of situation. And then she's like apologizing, and she's like, I brought down on them in an act of justice, and then she's like, an act of vengeance. And she kept walking backwards, and then she returns to Terra.
He doesn't care about life, but I do. Oh wait, I do.
She returns back to Terra, and she's like, I'm sorry, I'll fix this. So she puts her hand on the ground. She kind of just followed her instincts, summoning the ether. And then it responded in a hot rush, and tendrils of ether rolled out, casting a glow as the essence swirled under and over the shells of the dead, leaving glittering daylight in its wake. Her fingers dug into the soil, wisps of primal mist seep beneath them, curling and spreading across the ground. Then she essentially brought back to life a child, and the child was like, Mama, I had a bad nightmare.
Did she bring back to life everyone in Terra?
Yeah, well, we'll get to that.
Yeah.
A man is like thanking her, and Sarah's just like, no, because honestly, it was kind of her fault in the first place, low key. And then she tells everyone, rise and leave this place and never return. There is nothing but death here in the blood forest. There it is.
That's why there's no one there. There we go.
Then as they fled, she left and returned back to Wayfair to her family. She said, her heart shattered again, but I would fix it. I was the true primal of life. I could bring them back, all of them. And then she hears her name, and who is it? None other than Holland. Holland stood before me, the heated wind tugging at the white linen pants and tunic he wore. It's giving white lighter. Somehow, the pristine material remained unblemished as he stood among the dead, those he'd shared suppers and stories with. His ageless face mirrored those scattered around him. His expression showed horror. He wasn't looking at me, he was looking at everything around us. And he goes, "What have you done?" And Sarah's like, "What have you done?" And he's like, "You killed a primal, Sarah." And
No
she's like,
shit, Sherlock. Are you here to help or not?
she's literally like, "Do you not see what Colas did to everyone here, to my mother, to Marisol and Ezra? I gave him a chance, I made him an offer, and this was his answer. He nearly killed everyone in the city. He acted, and I'm reacting." And Holland's like, "And you killed nearly as many." And she's like, "I'm fixing that. I'm going to undo." And Holland cuts her off and says, "You cannot do that. You have already brought Marisol back once. You cannot do it again. Her soul is now beyond your reach and can only be released by death. The true primal of death. Why do you think
Gross.
Ethos hid Satoria's soul? Question mark. Oh. It is how the balance is kept. You already gave Marisol a second chance. The realms prevent that from happening again. She is gone. God, I hate it here. And
Maybe?
then what?
Never
There's
mind.
no maybe.
I
Just
was gonna say
take the
maybe
defeat.
Tawny is like Ezra or Marisol. Anyways.
That'd be so adorable if they were like me. Anyway. And then she's like, he doesn't hold the souls of the others, and Holland's like, you can't bring them back, Sarah. And she's like, I can't. I'm the true primal of life. Boss bitch status. And he's like, I know you are, but just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. And then she's getting mad. She's like, don't pull that philosophical bullshit, Holland. My family is dead. My city is nearly gone. And he's like, I know it hurts,
Great.
and I'm sorry. This shouldn't have happened. It's not fair. Holland, you're not helping. You're putting salt in the wound. And he's like,
And a little
you'll
bit of
just
lemon juice.
something like that, maybe vinegar. He says you'll just end up repeating everything that led to this very moment. You've already started to with those you brought back. And she's like, this is different. And he's like, listen to me, please. You know what happens if you bring them back. Other lives will be forfeited to take their place. And she's like, I don't care. And he's like, you must care. It's the only way balance can be kept. And she's like, fuck balance. Retweet, girlfriend. Where were you to remind Colas of balance when he ordered this? Where were any of you? Did you see this, Holland? And she's like, did you know that this would happen and do nothing? You knew these people. You knew Ezra. And this is where Holland just goes higher and higher on my shit list. There are many threads, many possible outcomes, ones we cannot interfere in. And he is just like, I'm sorry. And she's like, I told them to call my name, said I would come. Ezra didn't do it, but I heard her shrieks. Why didn't she call me? Why didn't you do what I told you? And Holland's like, you know why. She would never willingly endanger you. Oh, I'm gonna cry again.
Stop. I can't. Oh, I hate these chapters so much.
And he's like, you need to let them all go, Sarah. This is not where you are needed, and you're in no condition to continue as you are. And she's like, well, where am I needed? And Holland's like, a god who serves in Lotho must be ascended soon. The energy Embers' death release is making its way across all the realms. It must return to a vessel before it circles back. And she's like, I know what will happen. That doesn't change what I must do. I have to bring Ezra back. I have to bring them all back. And Holland's like, I don't want to hurt you.
I hate what Holland says here, man.
This whole exchange is just bullshit, but it's fine. And then he says, Ethos once found himself in a similar position. A plague struck down a village he favored. He brought them back, all of them, even though that was not what the realms needed. And he continued to do so, each restored life leading to others believing there would always be a second chance. And each life cost another theirs until he had ended the lives of as many as he restored. By the time he realized his folly, it was already too late. It was expected from him. You need to be better than that, Sarah. And she's like, I don't care. And she doesn't care about being better than Ethos or anyone. And Holland's like, how can you think that?
No, I get it though, because like I hate when people compare me to someone, be like, you need to be better than that. And that looks like, stop comparing me to other people. Like, that's not going to get me anywhere. It's not
Yeah,
gonna
well,
get us anywhere.
she says trying to be better is what stopped her from going after Colas. Trying to be better is what prevented her from refusing his deal and entering the Arini. Trying to be what I'm not is what allowed this. And he's like, "What are you, Sarah?" And she says, "What you trained to be, a fighter, a killer, not some fucking benevolent ball of goodness. If I had just listened to my gut from the beginning," and Holland's like, "Things would have been different. Maybe, perhaps if you had rejected Colas's offer, this would have never happened. Or maybe you would have lost those here and more in the battle that followed. Maybe if Colas hadn't kept all his pain to himself, he would have turned out differently. Maybe if you hadn't held in all of your pain, you wouldn't have given into it now. Many things
Ugh.
could have been different. But this is what happened. Now you must do what is right for the realms."
That's the one line out of this whole exchange that I highlighted was maybe if you hadn't held in all your pain, you wouldn't have given into it now.
Well, her response is, "I don't give a fuck about the realms." So,
Yeah, well, like there's a part of me that understands what he says, but there's a part of me that wants to punch him in the face for saying it at the same time.
yeah, and then she's like, "Try to stop me," and Holland changes, becoming taller and broader. His features sharpened, his flesh became starlit as the mist formed wings, and no, we're not calling him Daddy. And then thickened, solidifying until I thought I saw glossy black feathers in the glow of the nearby fires. Holland shoots up, and raw energy slammed into Holland, rippling over his body before seeping into him. And he's like, "You know better than that." And she took a breath, and then she was no longer in the courtyard, but standing on the white limestone and granite steps of the Temple of Kila, and she was in the heart of Crofts Cross. Why would
I
you
want
name
to
something
know
that?
how you can speak with a mouthful of starlight. That's the one thing I'm trying to understand.
I don't think those are mutually exclusive. Like, I think your mouth still works, or your throat
I
and
know, but
vocal
it's
cords
just
still work.
it's hard to imagine that his mouth was full of starlight. Like, did light come from it? Or was it like that ethereal?
I think it was an ethereal vibe, but who
Okay.
really knows? So then Holland tells her to look, and she sees bodies lay everywhere. Survivors scrambled up heaps of jagged stone. There were screams for help, pleas for the gods to bring aid, and among the chaos, a dark-haired woman, robed in white, stood in the cluttered roadway, cradling a limp babe against her chest. And Sarah recognized her. She was the priestess she'd seen when she came to retrieve Norbert's children, Nate and Ellie, the one who had said the age of the Golden King was over and that no Muriel sat on the throne, and never would again. The priestess's sorrow-filled gaze lifted and met hers, and Holland says, "Look at what has already happened to the people you were willing to die to protect. Are you willing to exchange their lives for your Ezra? Are you willing to take their lives?" And then he just saying that these people are the ones who will pay the price. Everyone who walks will. And her chest cracks somehow deeper and more unforgiving than before. And he says, "And do you think those you bring back will not know the price that was paid? They have been dead long enough to know, just as many of the villagers were. They will return to see their family and friends dead in their place. Do you think they'd want that? Do you think those you've sentenced to that fate wanted that?" And Sarah comes to the realization that she couldn't do that to them. This was Colus's fault, but she, has her moment of so many lives have been lost, and she's like, "What have I done?" God, I hate this. I hate these chapters. I hate this. I respectfully hate this episode. Shudder went through her, and she stumbles forward. Her legs went out from under her. Her knees pressed into damp soil as the weight of it all fell upon her. Each act of vengeance and retribution fell like the stones I had torn down and mountains she had crumbled. She pitched forward, placing her hands on the grass. And she's essentially reliving this nightmare of a chapter or chapters. Am I only on my first oh my god, I'm only on my first chapter. Anyway, she's reliving all of this shit. And she summons the ether, and the power responded to her will, stretching out and wrapping itself around each blood tree. She destroyed them one by one, unable to bear the sight of what she'd done. I destroyed all but a cluster that stood at the foot of what remained of the undying hills. The line between acting in rightful justice and lashing out in wrathful vengeance was a fine one, incredibly thin and so easy to cross. I needed no Vendentia to know that. I'd always known, but I hadn't just crossed that line. I'd destroyed it. She broke. She rocked back, bloody hands fisting in her hair as she screamed. Tears coursed down her cheeks and fell from the sky. She screamed until she thought she might rip apart, until her voice gave out and there was nothing. And then Attias shows up in the nick of time. Attias just shows up in these moments, and I'm just like, I can't. And she's like, look what I did. And he says, look at me. I need you to focus on me and listen. If you don't, there will be more death and destruction. Lotho needs a primal, and only you can ascend one. If you don't do it, and do it now, the essence will circle back, and there will be even more damage. You must stop this. And she's like, I know. And so relief pours into Atti's features, and he helps her stand as they shadow step to Mount Lotho. God, this is... All right. Chapter 43. I hate it here. Can I say that again? I hate it here.
Hey, the revenge is done. Continue.
Anyways, Attis spends a good couple pieces of the first page and a half of the chapter kind of getting Sarah to focus. And Attis is just like, are you okay? Essentially. And then Penelope shows up and she asks, are you okay? And Sarah's just like, there isn't time for that. Are you willing to accept the position of primal of this court? And she's like, I am, but there are other gods older than me, more deserving. And Sarah's like, I don't know them. I know you. And Penelope's like, then I accept. So then she ascends Penelope, and Sarah says, rise as the primal goddess of wisdom, loyalty, and duty. Duty.
Are you willing to ascend? Cool, let me bite you now.
Correct. So she gets ascended, and Penelope either surrounds her and goes inside her, and there's a bunch of throbbing, and then she flickers out, and Penelope drops from the air. And
don't say there's a bunch of throbbing again.
Anyway, Holland appears and was there before Attis or Sarah could do anything. He caught Penelope, cradling her limp body in his arms, and he says, I got you. And Holland says, thank you to Sarah. And Sarah's eyes slam shut, violent emotions swirling dangerously inside of her. She steps back and turns away, swaying lightly, and Attis is like, Sarah. And she's like, I'm fine. And he says, no, you're not. You're dizzy, aren't you? Don't even bother lying. You're walking like you've drunk a fifth of whiskey. And she's like, well, why did you ask? And he says, because I have no idea what you plan to do next. And I doubt you realize the vulnerable state you're in right now. You're a fledgling primal, and you've used way too much ether. And she's like, I'm fine. I drank remembrance. And she winces as she says that. And he says, and you just ascended Penelope. Whatever you gained will deplete quickly. Come on, I'm taking you home. And she didn't protest. She was tired. She was done. Hate it here.
But did they get to make it home? No.
No, Attis says, motherfucker.
And we all said motherfucker.
And Sarah's eyes meet Holland's, and he's like, I didn't see this. This was not a thread. And Holland, a fate, an ancient,
fucking
sounded
threads.
Afraid. And Holland's just like, do not fight, you will not win, Seraphina. And then he vanished with Penelope. And without warning, bitch asses are moving in opposite directions. Sarah slides across the floor, boots slipping. She falls to her knees just as the horned tail of a draken whipped through the atrium right above her head before slamming into Attis. And Attis is like, fuck you, Thrax, that was unnecessary. I'm depressed. Anyway, there's a whole back and forth. Sarah summons the ether, feeling it pulse wildly. Too wildly, a bolt erupted from her palm, nowhere near as strong as earlier. The silvery gold stream arched across the chamber, striking the dragon in the side. Thrax yelped and lurched toward her. His jaws opened as he roared, the force sending me back about a half a foot, the stench of sulfur and blood choking her. And she says, hey, you fucker, your breath smells like your mouth has been up Kin's ass, which cracked me up.
We love it.
And then Colas enters. I hate these chapters. I hate to love these chapters. These are pivotal moments in the book, but when I tell you, rereading and reliving this over again is so difficult.
I love that people will be able to tell our feelings toward a chapter because our tone changes so drastically. Like the other episode, we're smiling and hopping around, and yeah. And this episode, and then this person comes in, and
yeah, so Colas enters, and then in true Colas asshole fashion, he essentially murders a bunch of Draken, and Sarah's just like, you sick bastard, stop. And he's like, why? And she asks, why would you do that? And Colas says, you should know. And he's like, she says, other than you being absolutely demented, do you even know why you are this way? And Colas says, you really think that would hurt me? A primal, a millennium old, you silly cunt. He really just makes that word not as appealing to me
I was
anymore.
about to say, he takes your favorite word and really, like, just makes it gross.
Correct. He says, I should thank you for ascending a primal to take Embers's place. I would have chosen someone different, but she will be so lovely when she kneels before me and pledges her allegiance. Not as fulfilling as when you do, but still enjoyable.
Oh, I hate him so much.
And he says that you killed tonight, Sarah. You murdered coldly and without thought or care. You're no better than me. And he's like egging her on and saying, come on, Seraphina, lash out at me. Fight me like the primal you think you are, or can't you get it up? And Sarah's like, that sounds like your problem. And so they have a quick little back and forth. And I mean, obviously Sarah's weak, so she can't really do much. And so Sarah's mind clicks off. There was nothing primal or mortal about what she did next. It was pure animalistic, unbridled rage. She snapped her head forward, not even feeling the strands of her hair she tore out in the process, and went for the closest part of him, sinking her fangs into the side of his throat. Colas roared and jerked his head back, his flesh ripped, spilling even more blood. It coursed down his neck and her chin. She didn't even have a chance to swallow it. Then she was flying. Interesting, to be honest with you.
Right?
And Colas is like, you're so incredibly easy to provoke. And she's doing her, like, breathing exercises. And Colas goes, Nick just can feel you right now, even though he's at the pillars. Blood isn't that powerful. The blessing of a heart bond, though. He can feel everything and do nothing. I do hope he senses Drake, and I would love nothing more than to send Nectus's body back to him.
Oh.
Oh. And then lightning ensues, and the temperature drops. And it's Ash, obviously reacting to all of the shit that's going down that he can't enjoy. And Colas says, believe it or not, I enjoyed escorting souls through the pillars, seeing their lives, their pain, how they loved, hated, their mistakes, and their successes. I live vicariously through them for eons, but I do not miss being tied to them. And he says, you're nothing but a fledgling primal without my nephew by your side, or a so-called fate to make sure your mouth doesn't get you in trouble. And Sarah realizes that Colas had set a trap, and she rushed right into it. And he says, admittedly, you killing Embers did catch me a little off guard. I didn't think you'd be able to harness that kind of power yet. That angered me, but having you unleash your rage and take quite a few people's lives in the process was also surprisingly arousing. I hate him. I gave you a chance, Seraphina. All you had to do was give me what I wanted. I would have left you and my nephew alone. I wouldn't have gone after your family. I would have had my everything. I would have been happy. I would have been whole for the first time in my fucking life.
Never
I
would
would
have
have what you and my nephew have, but you had to be this way. You had to ruin everything. You had to test me.
Always
And
putting blame on other people.
that's exactly what Sarah says. She's like, do you ever not blame yourself, or do you ever not blame yourself for anything? Oh, wait, you have. You blame yourself for your brother's death. And Colas is like, you have no idea what you're talking about. And she's like, you know that that's bullshit. You loved him, he loved you, and you murdered him by accident. And she goes, tell me, Colas, do you really want to live? Because I know what I saw when I drove the bone through your chest. Relief. And he says, shut the fuck up. He said, I think I'm owed that, aren't I, in terms of her saying fuck you. And she's like, I thought you were waiting for Satoria. He said I was. It's not like I'd be betraying Satoria. I don't desire you or your body. I desire your pain and submission, your humiliation. And since I know her soul is in the star, I also know she's not out there waiting for me. And Sarah's like, waiting for you? You mean hiding from you, willing to end her life to escape you? And Colas is like, you and I are really going to need to work on that mouth of yours. Because you and I, we're going to spend a lot of time together. And then she's screaming for him to get off of her. And then he brings back their time together and can, having his way as he promised. And he says, you will give me retribution. I will keep you alive until Satoria matures, and then I will drain every drop of blood and essence from you and rise as the primal of ash and blood. Well, joke's on you. That will take years, Serafina. Years. And in those years, you will feel what I have. What it's like to have the one thing you only ever wanted repeatedly taken from you. Do you know how that feels? You should have gotten a taste of it since I've already begun. And then he goes, do you? And she says, fuck off. And he says, I want Nyctos's death. There's just a lot of whole back and forth and demented thinking in this chapter. And essentially, he's like, by the end of it, you guys will be begging me for death. And he asks Sarah if he scares her. And she says, no, you don't scare me anymore. I feel absolutely nothing when it comes to you. And he goes, we'll have to change that, won't we? And she says, I think I'll have to pass on that offer. Crimson ether flared in his eyes, and I knew what he was about to do, but he didn't get the chance. The bone dagger I'd dropped sliced clear through Colus's throat as his head was jerked back. Hot, shimmery blood sprayed her face, and the primal reared, his shout ending in an abrupt crunch of bone, as Ward, the first victor, cut the fucker's head clean off his shoulders.
Fuck yeah, Victor. Oh, I love him so much. Oh,
it's not the best.
The only good thing about...
Yeah, that was the only good thing. Respectfully, that was the only good thing. Respectfully, it makes me sad. I don't know. Anyway, honestly, what a great cutoff. I think we've really spaced these chapters out real great.
We did.
And we get to dive deep into it more next week. Yeah. Hold on. What?
Record more next week.
Oh, yeah, we'll be trickling these out. So we just did that. Yeah, we'll have one more episode tomorrow when you're listening to this if you're listening to this on drop day, we'll have one more episode tomorrow. And then we're going to go back to weekly episodes as we wrap up before Thanksgiving or by Thanksgiving. It'll be before Thanksgiving, but by Thanksgiving.
And we'll make a lot of great, cute, fun, not book related, but sometimes book related content when we're in person.
It might be very vloggy, to be honest. I'm kind of maybe in my vlog era. We'll see.
It'll be great.
It'll be great.
You'll be annoyed of us by the end of it, and we love it.
It'll be fine. Sippin' and bitchin' on everything. Like, follow, share, subscribe.
All the things.
Great. All the things.
Join our Discord.
And join our Discord. People call us out when we take 5 years to put all these episodes out. It's pretty fun.
You know who you are.
You know who you are. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but we'll catch you later, bitches. And that's tomorrow. So yay!
Bye!
Bye!